interesting conversation. I kind of jumped right into talking about nuclear a little bit, but I think I'd like to give everybody on the panel just a quick moment to introduce themselves and tell us a little about yourself, and then we'll jump into questions, and we'll just start there on the end.
Sure. Reed Clay, I'm the president and founder of the Texas Nuclear Alliance. It's a group I started about 3 or 4 years ago to make Texas the energy capital of the world. And a lot like the representative was just talking about, our goal is really to bridge the gap between, where the industry is now to full commercialization and utilization of nuclear.
Virginia Stevens, I go by VA. If anyone here has seen me before, maybe you don't recognize Virginia on my name tag. But I just left the Texas Public Utility Commission after helping direct the Texas Advanced Nuclear Reactor Working Group on behalf of Governor Abbott and PUC Commissioner Jimmy Glotfelty. We're very grateful for all the volunteers and experts that participated in that working group, which led to legislation and appropriation that you referenced in your remarks. And those grants are open right now. We can talk more about that if you want. And the whole group really also appreciates what Reed and the House Texas Nuclear Caucus, which is now, I think, a full third of the Texas House, also they do that as a volunteer effort pretty much to help sort of support the efforts on behalf of Texas and the needs that our grid obviously has. So thank you.
Good morning. David Stack. I serve as Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research for the Texas A&M University System. I lead our efforts in what we call our energy proving grounds, which is really a place to allow first-of-a-kind deployments. I lead our nuclear initiatives, where we're working with multiple companies to site new reactors on our Rellis campus in Brazos County. Also a faculty member in mechanical engineering at A&M.
Thank you very much. I think, this is interesting because we have a panel from Texas, and Texas is making big moves on this stuff. A lot of growth here in business and otherwise. I guess the first question I would have for the panel is, do you see this as a Texas-specific thing? We talk about in Colorado a lot of decarbonization, and sometimes that language can be a little polarizing in today's politics. And so I guess I'm wondering, what is it that's allowing Texas to kind of bridge this gap amongst, all of the folks in the state when it comes to these energy problems? We are seeing kind of a lot of pushback for data centers and all of that sort of thing. So I'm wondering, what makes Texas different? How are you messaging this work?
You want me to go first? Sure. Well, yeah, I think every state is different, of course, and I think one of, the thing that really has sort of caught people's attention about nuclear in Texas may be different than what is the case in other states, although I don't think it's entirely different. After Uri, I think we took Uri as the winter storm that caused, significant blackouts here in the state of Texas. We took a really hard look underneath the hood of ERCOT, and I think, realized that we were barreling towards, generation mix that was, going to be, lack reliability is the word I'll use. We had basically the previous 10 years built, from a net generation perspective, only wind. We had built some natural gas during that time, but that was replacing natural gas that was retiring. Essentially Texas had become the leader in wind energy. But I think really what caught people's attention was the lack of reliable baseload power, and nuclear was the potential to do that. I think simultaneously the data center craze or large load craze really hit Texas before anywhere else, going back 6 or 7 years ago. And those two things collided to make nuclear, and small modular nuclear in particular, something that the state really wanted to look into. And I'll let VA talk about this, but one of the early things the governor did very soon after the winter storm was the project Wooddow was announced, where they're building a 4-pack of X-Energy's SMRs at their Seadrift site to replace some natural gas cogeneration. He was very excited about that project. His first question to the CEO was, "Can you build more?" And that sort of spawned what became the Advanced Nuclear Working Group, which really was designed to say, hey, this technology is really advanced. How do we leverage that going forward? So, as I said in the opening, Representative, I think this is a bipartisan issue. The flavor of it in Texas is more about reliability, national security, energy security, the things that Texas has always sort of been front and center on, but it needs to remain a bipartisan issue, and this is why we're, happy that EarthX is really kind of talking about nuclear. VA mentioned the House Nuclear Caucus. That is a bipartisan caucus, which is, needs to remain that way.
Yeah, thanks, Reed. That's exactly right. And I also, sometimes at the Texas legislature, you don't have as much as Democrat versus Republican on some issues. It becomes more, when it gets down to it, rural versus suburban versus urban. And I think a lot of other states, Colorado I'm sure does, between Denver and you're of the other side of the range, right? And the disparate in the geography. I mean, Texas is almost 4 different states. And what Texas, we found out during Uri, sadly, that ice storm, which had the audacity to happen while our legislature was in session, so they were able to make some new laws quickly, including expanding the PUC commissioners from 3 to 5, which is how we got there. But it also pointed out the need for highly resilient power between not just the ice storm, but hurricanes along the coast. When the last really bad, I think it was Beryl, hit, and CenterPoint Energy in Houston, it took, like as long as the ice storm to get lines cleaned up and power back on. South Texas nuclear plant there on the coast didn't lose power for 5 seconds. And as part of the working group, we looked to end users, and we barely knew what data centers were in August 16th of 2023 when Governor Abbott started this effort. But we knew like the Samsungs and how much money they lost if they lost power for even 5 minutes in such of a detailed, precise manufacturing facility. So I think resiliency is another thing that kind of binds everybody together for the type of power that small modular reactors in particular can provide, with all excellent work the universities, and I think every state has good universities that can help with them get to these answers, and also working with the national labs. So I know I gave a long answer, which I don't love to do, but the national labs are extremely helpful. We don't actually have one in Texas, but hopefully we will one day.
Great segue.
Dr. Stack, would you like to weigh in on that one?
I would, just to reiterate what they're saying, Texas has been a leader in all forms of energy, right? Whether it is oil, it is gas, it is wind, it is solar. We actually lead in all 4 of those now. The initiatives in nuclear are really to fulfill that mix, right? We'll also probably be leading in storage before long here. To help address all of that, right? A lot of that comes from the population in Texas and the manufacturing that has been happening in Texas historically. And so Texas may be at the forefront, and we're going to hopefully learn new things that other states adopt and learn, through our universities, through our kind of demonstrations that we're working on.
Great. I mean, this is really exciting stuff. I think in Colorado we're a little jealous, and I think we're also looking to figure out kind of what are these entities going to do? How are they going to bring us from where we're at today to the point of success, which I think would be turning on a new power source in the state. And so my question, I guess I'll ask you, Virginia, first. What are the gaps that need to be filled? How do you see this new Texas structure coming together to actually speed up the process and make it easier between what's required federally and what's required on the state level?
Well, that is probably a question that can apply to every other state that's interested in promoting these. And I think the way that Commissioner Glotfelty, under the governor's leadership, structured this working group, I think helped make it successful, because we didn't just look at, okay, NuScale, you're building a reactor, come on and join us. We looked at, again, end users like Samsung. We looked at our universities, A&M, UT. We looked at the manufacturing supply chain, the people that build the gauges and the pipes and the metallurgy, and that have built other industries in Texas between aerospace and oil and gas. And we made a point to include people from all those sectors to look at it basically, and the workforce. I like to call it the supply chain of people and things. No, it doesn't catch. It's not very catchy, I don't guess, but it's true. Because you talk to the developers, what's your biggest challenge? And they don't say money as often as they say workforce. So, but in terms of like I know the panel before talked about permitting. I think this is something that we talked a lot about at the working group, and a lot of Reed's members have addressed. He mentioned Dow in particular with the project on the coast with X Energy. And you talk about permitting. The NRC licensing is certainly the most important and most critical part of that, but you still have your state licensing and local licensing. And the idea when the Texas legislature passed the bill creating a nuclear permitting officer in the new Office of Nuclear at the governor's office was to help guide people through the state and local permitting process in particular. Because who knows, in some areas you might have a groundwater district, you might have a historic site, you might have an Indian burial mound. I mean, all these things that apply to traditional projects. So the idea of sort of a one-stop shopping for permitting is something that our working group and our legislators felt would be really helpful. So does someone doesn't have to go to the environmental agency and wait 2 months for someone to say, oh, this is in a stack of emails. So right, it's kind of to just make sure everyone knows what are the 4 pages of a two-sided document you need, and how do you start and who do you find to get that done. And so it's just making it a little bit easier to, sorry to the lawyers, but cut down on the lawyers' regulatory time. And I had something else to say about that, but maybe I'll think of it later. Anyway, so that's the bottom line. I think other states could do that. And yes, we did have some money that got appropriated.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that some, if not many, states are currently lacking just in our current budget situations. And so, that's another thing when we do talk about the limited budget we have and how we can go about securing budget and doing the things that we want to do. It really comes about how we talk about these things and how we work together on these things. And so my question is, did kind of the coalitions come together to help support this idea in Texas? Did you get kind of your environmental groups? Did you get your business groups? Like, how did you bring kind of this bipartisan all-together effort together? And yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, really two things kind of were going on at the same time. I think, the importance of the governor asking Jimmy and VA to do the Advanced Nuclear Working Group is something that I think when the history of, nuclear in Texas gets written, will be, I think, appreciated more than maybe it's appreciated even now. It allowed the PUC, our Electricity Regulatory Authority, gave them a mandate to bring in all of the different stakeholders, sit them around a table and say, what do we need to do in order to make, nuclear successful? And that conversation, spurred a report, which spurred recommendations, which spurred legislation that passed. And so in a lot of ways, that convening of people is going to be, I think, viewed as, a real catalyst for the moment that Texas is having with respect to nuclear. The second thing that was going on was that a certain university that may be represented on this stage decided that they wanted to be a leader in artificial intelligence, and that in order to do that, they were going to have to find their own power. And they got some very good advice, in my opinion, from somebody who's very instrumental in both the Texas A&M University system and the nuclear industry, that nuclears ought to be something they looked at. And to their credit, the system spawned what Dr. Stack is now in charge of, which is our test bed. The third thing that happened that was getting everybody around the table was the creation of the Alliance, which we did, kind of around the same time. And, that essentially created a forum and an organization for the industry to come together, coalesce, and speak with one voice. It did not exist prior to the Alliance. Not only did it not exist in Texas, it really did not exist in any state across the United States, which is, if you're in politics and you work in public policy, you know that every industry, from oil and gas to hospitals to health plans to, insurance, realtors, they all have a group that convenes everyone around a table, discusses what the policy initiatives and changes need to be in that state in order for the industry to flourish. And it didn't exist for nuclear. We created that sort of, I'll call it infrastructure, to allow the industry to have a voice. We essentially picked up the baton from the Advanced Nuclear Working Group. And by that time, we had, I don't know how many members, close to 60 members going into last legislative session. And that is a really important, the strength of those number of voices is extremely important in order to, really communicate a message and get something done inside the Capitol. And so those three things were going on at the same time that really brought a lot of people to the table. And I think ensured some buy-in and interest in what was going to happen in Texas.
Thank you. And you know what? I'm going to pivot to the doc. He mentioned academia. You know, those of us who are in politics know our universities are very important players down at the state houses. They are driving a lot of these conversations around what they need to do what they're doing. So tell us about what's happening with your department and where you see it going and kind of what Testbed Reed's talking about.
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, looking at the growth of the university, looking at the growth of AI, we said, we're a 100 megawatt consumer today. We see ourselves as being a gigawatt consumer in 10 to 15 years, right? Just with AI and growth. We'd been level at about 90 megawatts for, as you kind of mentioned, almost a decade with efficiencies, but yet 25,000 extra students, right? But we didn't see that in the future, and so we issued a plan to engage industry and said that we would host reactors on our campus in order to serve our needs. As that developed, it turned into hosting first-of-a-kind demonstrations on behalf of the state, and kind of with the DOE authorizations, which were issued kind of last year, that built upon that. Demonstration reactors for the Department of Energy, right? People have talked about kind of the national lab demonstrations, but a part of that executive order was also to host new sites outside of nuclear reactors. And so we have 3 sites on our Rellis campus where demonstration fuel line and demonstration reactors will be built. One of the companies that's well announced on this is Last Energy. Intends to have a criticality demonstration, so an operating reactor this summer, and intends within 2 years to put electricity on the grid. As part of a demonstration, right, as kind of, obviously we worked with various of these, and we've kind of talked to legislatures on it. The last group that was up here talked about, hurdles to deployment, right? Financial is one of them, regulatory is one of them. We focused on microreactors and small modular reactors because we saw those as pathways to faster deployment from a financial risk point of view. The DOE, we engaged the NRC very early on, right, with early site permitting to kind of de-risk information for the groups that we were going to work with. The Department of Energy process, brand new, as a university, probably unusual, right? We're also the municipality, right? We're also the permitting authority locally. Able on to take on incredible uncertainty in terms of what the regulatory process was going to be through the DOE, but have worked with companies to make it happen, right? I think as a partner in that sense, we're probably more nimble than and more informed than the standard partner. And so we're hoping to see great success out of it. And with the funding at the state level, certainly helps. For kind of the gigascale reactors, it's a drop in the bucket. For the medium-sized reactors, it's good. It's going to kind of incentivize the private funding that's happening in this right now.
That's a great segue. So, Texas is, I think a lot of states are looking at it and saying, the business climate here, all of these things are kind of coming together. And so I guess we'll pivot back to you, Virginia, and talk about kind of how are those things coming together? How is that vision coming together? And, how important is energy to Texas in its future economic ambitions? And then just on a side note, will you stop taking companies from our state? Just kidding.
So, no. I think the governor doesn't care what I say very often, but I think he'd hear about it if I said, oh, yeah, stay in Colorado. I'll give one tangible example because I just happened to talk to their CEO recently. There's a company called Allo Atomics, and they're a member of Reed's, I'm sure. I'm not sure if they're part of the Rellis. They are part of the Rellis. They're one of the award winners of the Rellis campus. Their CEO showed up at one of our working group meetings, I would say in early 2024. Our working group only lasted from August of 2023 to November of 2024. I was 6 feet tall when it started. I'm 5'2" now. That was a joke, people. Lighten up. So their CEO came to one of our working group meetings from Idaho, and then he came to another one. He had 2 employees at the time. they started manufacturing in South Austin. They now have 150 employees and have raised, I think, $250 million, are looking at building a 1 million square foot manufacturing facility to replicate what they've done, and are hoping to get criticality from the Idaho National Lab testing proving ground within a couple of months. And I think that's a combination of, if Matt, their CEO, was here, would say, the governor's leadership, the working group being inclusive and having, our meetings available by teams. We had people from around the world. There's a guy that moved to Austin from Australia because he heard about and started joining on by teams. So I think part of it is leadership from the top, and I know some of the governors of other states are doing this. You mentioned your governor is interested. It's in engaging the academic partners. As of course, a non-Aggie, I went to UT. We have a very good nuclear engineering department at UT, and they're also working on the vast, again, workforce needs of not just the nuclear engineers, but the welders and the general development that you need for a large construction project. And in addition to community support, there was a lot of talk about, retiring coal plants to nuclear. Communities that are used to having energy production or manufacturing or large industries in their area, so they're not as uncomfortable with a new project coming in. I think that's the piece we have a lot more work to do. Reed and I've talked about this a little bit, but it's kind of all of that. And I think, I think other states could probably do it, not as well or as fast, but you can have the leftovers. Oh, and I will say, but actually, no, any state could. They're small modular reactors, right? The money that the legislature appropriated was really not that much, as you said, a drop in the bucket for what someone really needs to go all in. But I think it's symbolic, kind of showing that our state was serious about wanting to help give a little boost and have some, like, hey, we really care, we want you here, and we're going to give, I have them in my papers here, the grants are open right now, and the deadline for the first step of applying for a grant is tomorrow. Oh, sorry, it's Wednesday. It's the 23rd. So
Get your applications in.
that's right. If you just come see me if you want to apply.
Reed?
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, I think energy is, in Texas's blood. I mean, the oil and gas industry has been, sort of the backbone of Texas for a couple generations, maybe more at this point. And I think that has obviously aided our conversations with respect to nuclear. But the other thing that's maybe more fundamental to this is just the business climate in general that has been manicured and curated over the last, at least 3 decades, probably 4 decades, that has just a business welcoming environment, wanting businesses to come here, wanting a regulatory environment that is, people use the word lax. I think that is an incorrect word. I think what it is predictable. People know what it is they have to do. They know how long it's going to take in order for them to come here and build a business. And then, so that very predictable regulatory environment is really what led to the demand center that is now propelling energy sources like nuclear to be here in the state of Texas. I mean, one of the reasons there's so much interest in the state of Texas is there's so much potential. If you're a nuclear power company, is that there's a potential to make money here because people are going to need the power here in the state of Texas. And so those things are very fundamental. They should not be overlooked. They took decades to really build and manicure. But they're also, I think, importantly, Representative, you talked about our enviable fiscal situation, which is undeniable. I mean, I think we really do sit in a different, totally different stratosphere than most other states at the moment in terms of our fiscal situation, and that has been extremely beneficial. It's one of the reasons that we were able to put close to $500 million into the nuclear industry this past legislative session. But the things that I just talked about, anybody can do. It doesn't require money. It requires an attitude shift about how you're going to interact with government and what your regulatory environment is going to look like. And Texas has just had the jump on that for many, many decades, but it can be replicated, in Colorado, it could be replicated. And I'm not saying, I don't know Colorado's regulatory environment, but it could be it could be, what's the word I'm looking for? Copied anywhere in the U.S. And I think if and when you do that, I think you're going to see businesses flock here. The last thing that VA mentioned that I'll underscore is really, I think the mentality of that really does maybe come from the oil and gas ethos, which is that we can do anything. The Texas bravado is I think a very real thing. And, you're seeing, that is one thing that I think the nuclear industry loves about Texas is, they love the idea that we're just going to, the industry has been mired in sort of stagnation for 3 or 4 decades, and, we don't care. We're going to, whatever the problems are, we've decided that we're going to figure it out here in the state of Texas and do it. And that's why I think the nuclear industry is drawn here. That's why I think, companies like SpaceX that want to go, to Mars are drawn to the state of Texas. It's that attitude that, we can do anything and we can build anything.
Yeah, let's pivot to those large loads, because you said we set up the climate for business, we're doing the energy things we need to do, and the question really comes Texas specific. So I'm going to assume folks in here have the basics understanding of what ERCOT is, and maybe not. Maybe you can give a little bit of that when you answer this question. But I'm looking for a little bit of information about Batch Zero. And what does that mean? And what does that mean for large loads as they come into the state of Texas? And I'll just open that up, and whoever wants to take that can take that, and then we'll kind of go down the line.
Who's spent the most time at ERCOT lately? I say the one that hasn't gets to start that answer. I've spent the most time there, so I don't want to answer it.
Well, so yeah, I mean, this is I'll try to keep this brief. I mean, if you're talking specifically about, okay, let's start at the top. ERCOT announced that there's 400,000 megawatts of load in our interconnection queue. Yep. And for context, our current peak demand is 95,000. So you're talking about 4x in the interconnection queue. That's crazy.
Can you say that again, just the top line number? Just so people can hear?
400,000 megawatts are in the interconnection queue. So these are proposed projects that want to come to the state of Texas and interconnect into ERCOT. By the way, ERCOT is Texas, but there are parts of Texas that are outside of ERCOT, and that's the ERCOT number. So you're talking about a huge amount of load moving to the state of Texas. So what Batch Zero stems from is a recognition that this is a huge problem because we do not have that much generation. It also stems from the fact that there's a high likelihood that not all of that 400,000 in the interconnection queue is real, that it is phantom load. Either that just will never materialize because the capital investment will not be there, the economics won't work out, or they're looking at multiple sites even within the state of Texas, or they're looking at a site inside the state of Texas, but will end up going to a site that they're looking at in Louisiana. And so the legislature passed Senate Bill 6 this past session, which was designed in part, it was designed to deal with some other issues as well, but designed in part to deal with this interconnection problem and to figure out what is real and what isn't. It did a couple things. It was requiring loads that are going to get into the queue or remain in the queue to pay a fee, and it allowed loads that are going to bring their own generation to jump the line, and it required ERCOT to stop doing one-off interconnection studies and start doing a batch process. And so Batch Zero is going to be the first round of projects that ERCOT essentially is going to approve for interconnection here in the next month or two, depending on how things go. And everybody is scrambling to make their project seem real, or be real, I should say, and also to make it clear to ERCOT, because the other part of this is the supply side. They want to know you're real, but we also have to make sure that where you are in the state is also going to be able to have the generation capacity to serve your project.
It's a great answer. It's very interesting. Dr. Stack, I'm going to pivot. Go ahead, Virginia.
I would like to say,
please do.
That was a very good answer. When ERCOT started really looking into how to implement Senate Bill 6 and came up with Batch Zero, they were going to have like 2 workshops and then go to the PUC for policy approval. The first workshop was I think the PUC chairman said, was going to be the most heavily attended ERCOT workshop ever. I was in the room. It was overflow in the ERCOT boardroom, which I'd never seen in my 3.5 years at the PUC. They had over 300 people, or no, over 600 people, I think, online watching the first Batch Zero workshop. And at the PUC just on Friday, the commissioners were talking about the comments they're getting on the policy side. I was looking just randomly at one of the data center companies had just filed a 61-page comment on it. I mean, it is certainly the most watched regulatory implementation thing that I think the boring electricity world has seen, and how to try to get their arms around how to manage this incoming growth, and particularly the transmission, because poles and wires in Texas are not deregulated. There are only so many transmission companies, and then I will let the doctor be more smart about it.
Doctor? Yeah, I was just gonna kind of dive in a little bit more on ERCOT, and how do you with this unique system make sure that the finances come together so that we actually build this technology? How's that going to happen?
The process at ERCOT has a review process for every one of these projects that is reviewed. I mean, our campus is one of the ones in line to have additional load served to our campus to be able to serve these. Our researchers actually, we have a smart grid center that works very closely with ERCOT in modeling, right? And a lot of that is behind NDA and the like, but simulations of these loads, simulations of growth, simulations of where to put things, and help answer these questions. The other challenges around that is, as you mentioned, is financing. The state does have financing to address some transmissions, right? We'll see what the reality is, and it's 400 gigawatts is a huge number, but Texas is the #1 consumer in the nation, so there's a reason it's a big number. A lot of users want to make that happen, right? And so it'll find a way. I think, I've been at a couple conferences in New York where the financing guys like to talk as well about, how capital is going to get behind this. It's a challenge. How much of the demand is realized is a challenge that we'll figure out hopefully soon.
Great. Well, now you guys have brought this model together in Texas, and I think, again, resource states, California, Texas, the New Yorks, even Floridas of the world, they have the ability to do things, and then other states kind of draft them and look at them and say, what about what Texas is doing can we do in our state with the resources that we have available? And so I want to open this one up to everybody and ask you, what of this Texas program, what of what you're doing here can we take home and potentially implement in our states to make sure that we can, keep the trend going nationwide towards moving towards this source and maybe slow down that leakage of our business community?
So, in kind of the giga reactors, the small reactors, and the micromodular reactors. I mean, a microscale reactor is a $50 million investment, right? Part of the reason we kind of leaned in towards smaller reactors in our demonstrations was that they're implementable in 3 years, and they're implementable without these, gigascale kind of 10-year timeline risks, $30 billion investment risks. A very different model. Lots of companies out there, right, in which to kind of say, well, which are the ones that are going to work out, right? When we started our initiative, actually, right, and we originally announced 4 companies. We're now up to 5 companies that we're collaborating with, and there's probably 3 or 4 more in the queue that we haven't announced. The legislature's response to us was, only 5, right? And part of that was because we don't know who's going to survive as these companies. We're trying to invest in multiple companies in order to de-risk our investment, and a lot of that is investment in time, not just in money, in order to make these happen in real estate. So to other states that are taking approaches, right, there's going to be the 0th of kind demonstrations that are literally going to start this year, right, under the DOE authorization. There are going to be new NRC regulatory pathways where those DOE authorizations will turn into commercial authorizations. And then there's going to be first of a kind adoption, right? And those are going to be in the microreactor space because those are the ones who can get off the ground fastest. Those are 10 to 20 megawatt, right, in a single module, and these are companies that think that they can make hundreds of these a year when they scale up, right? Which means they can be gigawatt solutions. But the nice thing is they're literally modular, right? You buy one, you de-risk financial investment. You do have a heavy load in the beginning because the regulatory aspects are comparable, right, in terms of what's happening. But it's much faster, much there is a lower impact in terms of safety in communities. So, a community can choose just to have a single microreactor and not hundreds of microreactors, right? So there's a lot of ways that the advanced nuclear in the small modular reactor and the microscale reactor is approachable from various communities.
Virginia?
10,000-foot view that both Reed and I have talked about is getting kind of a disparate group together early on. People might be interested in advanced nuclear technologies for different reasons. Like we've talked about the oil and gas sector quite a bit. One thing no one has mentioned, will mention it, is water. In the Permian Basin, you have produced water. There are some people that don't want it to be re-injected anymore. There are some people that think if you have a small microreactor, small as on a flatbed trailer, you can take it out to the Permian Basin and cost effectively clean that water up to a usable standard and not have to re-inject it. Same thing like desal on the coast. I think many other states, and then the Southeast and the Southwest and the West, have water issues. So microreactors is a solution for drought and water-related issues, to look at kind of not just a reactor for reactor's sake, but other interested constituencies, whether it's the people that want carbon-free, the people that are in hurricane or tornado-prone areas that need high resilience, drought-prone areas, workforce, all these things. And get Reed to come to your state and have a nuclear summit where he has everybody in one room at a nice hotel, and it does almost like a big mixture. And I don't say that lightheartedly because it's a very, very well-run thing that his group does. And he started with like 2 members and now has 70 or something like that. And again, it's from the supply chain to the fuel, the uranium mining, all of it, all in one room for 2 days, and they all get to know what each other are doing. And I think any state can do something like that and involve your universities. And if you have a national lab, and get your governor to talk about it.
Reed?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add to that. I think those are great comments. I mean, I think I'll go back to something I alluded to earlier. I mean, I think, you need a visionary. Texas A&M University System just said, hey, we're going to build nuclear. That seems like a normal thought here in 2026. In 2023, I think it was pretty visionary. You need a convener. The importance of what the PUC did and what Jimmy and VA did was the launching pad for what we were able to accomplish from a public policy standpoint. And I think you need an advocate. You need somebody who is just willing to bust through the barriers that it takes in order to actually get something done from a public policy perspective, because it usually takes a long time. You hear no a lot more than you hear yes initially. And you need somebody who believes passionately in what the industry is doing and what it could mean for the state of Texas. I mean, ultimately, one of the reasons that I'm actually wearing my USA socks today, but whenever I talk on nuclear, I either wear my USA socks or my Texas socks, because it reminds me of, why I started the Texas Nuclear Alliance, is because I loved my country and I love my state, and I thought nuclear was going to be great for our country and it was going to be great for our state. I think those are the 3 things you need.
Great.
There's one more thing.
Go ahead.
You mentioned this.
Yeah.
Is your military installations. I mean, you guys just got a DOE award. Texas has several military installations that are interested from security, national cybersecurity, all of it, and the need for, again, highly resilient power. And so we have a Joint Base San Antonio, 1 or 2 people that were very interested and active in our working group. And I think the military installation, and obviously they have history with nuclear. When I went down to the Port of Corpus Christi and said, where do y'all want to build a small reactor? It's like, get your snorkel. There's nuclear subs in Ingleside right there. So and anyone that has military installations, that's also a good partner to not overlook, because DOD is also very interested and they need that kind of power and are familiar with it. So kudos to you guys, because you got one on right already.
Yeah, we're excited about it. Well, most of us are excited about it, and that's how I kind of want to, bring this to a wrap. What's next? How do we get one of these things in the ground? How do we get going? And then how do we spread this understanding that what this can mean to our future. And I think, Reed, you put it great. It's about our country. It's about our states. We want to come back. We're feeling, we want to get ahead of this technology curve. What's next? What can the people in this room do? We'll hear from all of you on that.
They're going on the ground today as we speak, right? There are demonstrations that are happening. I think there's support from the community, right, is an important aspect, right? Informing the community, right? We did some public opinion surveys in our community as part of this process over the past year, and there's a direct correlation between acceptance to have a nuclear reactor in your backyard and knowing what a small modular reactor is. Another aspect which kind of helps us in our community is that the students are telling us to do this, right? We had a great situation where on ESPN Game Day, a student was holding up an I Heart Nuclear sign in the background, and that set off a viral kind of event across the nation where that was repeated on multiple campuses. So the next generation is telling us that this is what they want to do, right? They see this as a sustainable way to have what we have today, but continue it for tomorrow. So there's a lot we can do to encourage that and to engage that.
Oh, okay. Well, two things. The industry, it's time to build. That's one of our mottos at the Texas Nuclear Alliance. And, we are at a very critical moment where a lot of things are converging for the industry. A lot of hard work on technology advancement is mature now. A lot of support from both the state and federal government. And, the industry needs to progress from, the lab to, what is happening at, the Rellis campus in A&M, which is building reactors and showing that, that we can build them and they can be safe. And the only, what that will do along with the support that it's getting from the federal and state government is we are able to push the unit cost of reactors down the cost curve to the point where the private market will take over and it becomes commercialized again. We did it once, we can do it again. That's why I'm wearing my USA socks is, I believe this country is good at building things or used to be and it can be again. And I think the second thing is we cannot be complacent about, there's a lot of support like I talked about in nuclear right now. There's a lot of tailwinds. Everyone feels great that nuclear has got a lot of support, and that's true. But we cannot be complacent around that. We have to continue to educate people, as Dr. Stack talked about. We have to, when these things start to be built, I think you can expect activism against them in whatever state you're in. And we have to continue to educate and stay in front of that so that when we get to the point of building these things at scale, the old political problem that hindered the industry for so long is neutered from the outset.
And I remembered what I wanted to say. Thank you so much. To groups like this and other groups that we spend time with, there's a lot of support for nuclear. But one group I was with, a smart guy in the room said, and it wasn't you or you, said, support for nuclear right now is about a mile wide, but it's about an inch thin. Because people like the ideas conceptually, and Reed thankfully touched on this to remind me of I like that phrase. No one's really in Texas said, hey, San Saba County, we're going to come build a reactor there. How long does it take the opposition group to get formed? 5 ranchers get together, and there's your opposition group. We are seeing it in Texas, excuse my cough drop, with transmission build-out. We're seeing it in Texas with data centers. All these other states are seeing it with data centers. So the education early on is probably the next step, and more private sector financing probably. But definitely that sort of pre-NIMBY education and get the recognition and support more than an inch. So I said an inch thin, not an inch thick. Because, again, conceptually, all these words that we say sound great until someone says, well, we're going to put it just down the street from you.
Education, education, education. That's what we're here for. Well, please join me in thanking the members of our panel this morning.